I'm Tyler, and this is the AntiSocial Network.
Don't look away. Let the fear wash over you.
How? How do you manage every time to pick open a wound to a fresher hell?
Welcome to your number one source of internet oddities.
My IQ is the highest among all Reddit.
That's not saying much.
Here we host conversations with interesting people across the internet.
There's something beyond the direct physical observable world. You can't quantify, you can't put under a microscope. If you don't want to, immediately adopt the Muslim understanding of that, that's fine. You'll get there eventually.
You haven't heard of them, but I have.
It's not just witchcraft, it's nerds. You guys are nerds. My parents didn't let me read Harry Potter, not because of the demonic elements. They just didn't want me to be a nerd.
Join us every Friday for discussions on culture, entertainment, politics, religion, and whatever happens to catch our fancy that week.
I've always deemed myself an evil capitalist.
Because that's how they get you. They get in your head. They start making you ask funny questions. And before you know it, bang, you're a liberal.
I thought it was a matter of record.
Social credit deducted.
You're probably thinking this is some pretty deep stuff, and you're right.
This episode of the AntiSocial Network is brought to you by North Arrow Coffee Company, a veteran-owned company that donates 15% of its proceeds to pro-life groups like Soundview Pregnancy Services and Compass Care Crisis Pregnancy Center in Buffalo, New York. Support the AntiSocial Network and use code AntiSocial10 at checkout to receive 10% off your next purchase of coffee and other coffee-related products. Thank you very much. This week we are joined again by the intolerable Wesley P. Worrell. I haven't decided yet whether I should introduce you as a communist or a fascist, but I guess it depends on what day of the week it is.
Reminds me of the old Simpsons bit where in the McBain series, the bad guys are the commie Nazis.
Oh, he beat me to the Simpson reference.
got it in the first sentence. That's got to be a record.
Oh my gosh, that's great. But yeah,
Intolerable is a great descriptor, by the way. That's the intolerable, like you're introducing a wrestler or something.
That's a rather large word for a wrestler heel promo.
That is true.
The intolerable Hulk Hogan.
That could just be the name of a heel. The intolerable.
The deplorable.
Deplorable is great.
I don't know. That's monosyllabic words are slightly a bit much for wrestlers, but anyway, I guess we can't really hide the bury the lead any farther. But this is going to be the first in a series of episodes I'm calling the Dissident Book Club, and I need to explain what that is because it's probably going to get me in trouble with some people. This is our just attempt at reading nominally controversial or politically topical books that are slightly outside of, I guess, slightly outside of the common conversation.
Do you think you're big enough to get canceled?
No, but I mean, the problem is not that I'm going to get canceled. The problem is that I'm going to get an earful from some people who's like, you should know better than to talk about those people. I'm like, yeah, I know better than to approve of them blindly, right. Which is why I'm just talking about them. Which is part of the idea I wanted to go with is just discussing these people in the abstract and picking apart their ideas and saying what doesn't work, what does work, what kind of nuggets are actually worth taking out of it. Right. And I don't think there's really a better book to do that than Wesley's here's first suggestion of Alex Jones's book, The Great Reset and the War for the World, which I guess we kind of need to talk about our mutual relationships with Alex Jones before we get into this, because he currently owes the budget of a small island nation to the federal government at the moment. He's a famous 9/11 truther. He's got there's a lot of baggage surrounding Alex Jones. I've had editors talk about him in hushed tones, being like, "There's this guy, Alex Jones." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm under the age of 25. I'm under the age of 30. I know who Alex Jones is. He's very funny."
We'll definitely get to the funniest moment in the book at some point.
Oh yeah. I mean, we don't have a clear way we're tackling this, but what is your relationship with Alex Jones like?
Well, it's actually kind of crazy to me that he is like well known to people and like ubiquitous in culture, because I first heard about him right after 9/11.
Okay, we're going there, guys.
And here's the thing, like, you really had, and I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened, which was a very interesting age for that to be around in and to experience the culture of what was going on. And what happened was, for the only time in my life, and probably the last time in American politics ever, everyone was kind of on the same page. Like, everyone was, you have the common enemy, and, somebody attacked you, so you're Democrats and Republicans and everyone were really pro-America. Bush's approval rating was like 99.8% or something. And it was the only time when everybody had come together. And this was like a year after the Bush-Gore election, which all the Democrats said that Gore actually won. And so there was so much, everything was just kind of going down the tubes as far as like polarization was going. So for everybody to come together was really wild. And during that time, I was taking a couple classes with some really out there teachers in high school, and one of them, like a quarter of his curriculum, was Alex Jones stuff, and this was like in the months after 9/11.
Oh dear
so it's
Lord!
Like I was hearing 9/11 truther stuff before the world even knew it existed, and so it was wild. Like so, my knowledge of Alex Jones goes back to like before he had any sort of like mainstream popularity at all. And he was known as like a not really left wing, but definitely he didn't like Republicans. Like
there's a lot of footage of him from the early 2000s where he's like he was kind of like, I guess in his early stage he was like an Austin, Texas shock jock. Mm-hmm. So there's footage of him running around with Joe Rogan wearing George Bush masks, like just terrorizing White House security guards. The best early stuff is he appears in one not Wes Anderson, guy who directed Richard Linklater. He appears in one of Richard Linklater's movies as himself, just driving around Austin, Texas, ranting about the government. And Richard Linklater has since distanced himself from Alex Jones since.
But why?
I at the time he just thought Alex Jones was just this. Oh, it's just look at this interesting guy who happens to be like a famous guy in Austin, Texas. Isn't that kooky and novel? And then the guy became like public enemy number one, and got banned off every social media network and questioned the Sandy Hook shooting, and it just kind of spiraled out of control. And there's rabbit holes for all these things that you can go down, like on every side and every direction. Generally, he's not popular among either side, but particularly among the left, he's hated. And
it's interesting because the first time he had any sort of mainstream notoriety was protesting outside of the White House during George W. Bush's presidency.
Yeah,
that was the first time I ever saw him like mentioned outside of like the niche circles that I ended up being a part of because of these kooky teachers. But going back to when I first discovered him,
I was gonna say for a long time his most famous contribution was that he was one of the guys behind Loose Change. So. The 9/11 documentary that like every library had a copy of during the 2000s. So
the one that I think this was before, or maybe it was right after that, around the same time he had another documentary called 9/11 Road to Tyranny, and that's the one that we watched in the sociology class I was taking at the time. And to understand how radical it is, I have to give a little bit of background. This was at the time when everyone was like really pro-government. Even Democrats were kind of like were all in with Bush and with the response or whatever, and you had the sociology class in a public high school basically saying, 9/11 was an inside job. And it was so wild, like thinking about it back then, and it just totally blew my mind. And I thought the guy was crazy at first, and I thought the entire thing, like, I thought this guy was like kooky, and I didn't buy it at all. By the end of the class, like, I was a 9/11 truther for a long time. I'm not anymore.
Wesley, please say 9/11 was not an inside job on the recording.
9/11 was not an inside job.
Okay, good.
The closest I would come to something like that would be there might have been an upper echelon of the government that knew it was going to happen. This was above Bush, Cheney might have known about it, but
the famous. I don't want to go down 9/11 trutherism, but the famous thing that came out of 9/11 was just the realization that none of the security agencies were working together.
Right.
Like they all had a piece of what was going to happen. Mm. Like the FBI had something, the CIA knew something, but they didn't have any way to interact or share their information. So when push came to shove, they all walked up to the White House and said, "We knew about these guys. We had a report that a bunch of people from various countries in the Middle East were training how to fly planes and kept telling their instructors they didn't need to know how to land.
Right.
It's just like, okay, that's incriminating.
One of them did flight instruction in Minnesota.
I think the famous one was in Florida, but
Yeah.
I think they probably didn't do it all in the same place. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I guess shifting to my perspective on Jones, I don't remember when I heard of him, and I should say I don't follow InfoWars with any regularity or anything. It's just I got introduced to him because of the spectacle that is Alex Jones, and because Alex Jones rapidly became like one of the most popular memes people. Like, and what made it funny was just that Alex was leaning into it. He knew that like people thought he was funny, and people thought the way he talked was funny, and the way he expressed himself was funny, and so the meme culture just kind of fell in love with the guy as just like this public expression of absolute raging insanity.
And that's the thing, is that he's funny. I don't think people understand that. Like, the people on the outside looking in, they just think he's crazy. But, and that's the one of the reasons why it's tough to, like, get to the heart of what Alex Jones is part of it is show, part of it is a put on, and part of it is stuff that he legitimately thinks. And it's really hard to differentiate between those things a lot of the time.
It's got the Sam Hyde effect to it, where you don't know where the line between the genuine anti-establishment artist and the guy making white nationalist jokes is. Like,
right.
You kind of your heart of hearts wants to say he probably maybe he doesn't actually mean that,
Right.
but with Jones, like I his commentary, other than like the 9/11 and the Sandy Hook stuff, most of his commentary is just kind of route populism stuff for the most part. But I'm not saying that as a full-throated defense of him. Just that I don't think people tend to drum him up with associating with other things that aren't Alex Jones. Like they'll say, oh, he's clearly like anti-Semitic because he's rambling about the globalists, or they'll say,
and he talks to Kanye West.
Well, the Kanye West thing was amazing because Alex Jones was the only one that came out of that interview not looking crazy.
Yeah, which I would not have imagined ever happening.
Yeah, I mean, he's just sitting there trying to be like, well, you don't actually hate the Jews, right? Well, actually,
well, you don't like Hitler, right? How many times did Kanye say, I like Hitler in that interview? It was at least a handful.
Gosh dang it, Kanye, I owe the debt of a small island nation. Stop talking.
Right. There's that great picture of when Alex Jones realizes that he's like the sanest person in the room, where he's just looking at all of them like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, welcome to everybody else's interaction with you for the last 30 years.
Yeah, good lord. I mean, that tells you a lot about just the state of him, or the state of Kanye more than anything else. But
right. The through line of all of Alex Jones's stuff, and we're going to get into it a lot with the book for sure, is that the globalists, the New World Order, are trying to control everything about everybody's life. And he's been beating this drum since before 9/11, and that was why he thought 9/11 was an inside job. That's why he thought that Sandy Hook wasn't real. It was because he had this narrative that the globalists are trying to control everything, and he fit everything into that narrative.
So, first thing we have to do, and what does the word globalist mean, and why does it not mean Jews?
That's
the first thing that they're going to say.
That's one of the major critiques of Jones in general, is that you can say that it's this like global cadre, or it's a New World Order or whatever, but it's like you can't. He has named names in the past, but it's like it's a really vague thing, and it just kind of comes off as like a boogeyman, and you can shoehorn in so many different things with it. That's.
I mean, I've literally gotten like, I have alts on Twitter, and I've talked with people online, and I was colloquially using the word globalist as a just in conversation, like not even like agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. And the first thing some lefty does is just immediately pops up and said, "Oh, you're going full JQ now." I'm like, at the time, I had no mental association with the word globalist and that.
Right.
I'm just like, wait, what are you talking about? I was like, yeah, you know what the globalists are, right? It's like, no, to me, globalist means technocrat or some other, progressive liberal person in power. And I never made the association. It's like, I didn't know any like Jewish stereotypes at all until the internet explained them all painfully to me. It's like the banks. It's like, wait, what? What's wrong with the banks? we don't like the Swedes now. Like, what is it? What's going on there? But it's one of those things where you have to kind of define your terms because, people bring up the George Soros thing all the time, and like, I remember there's a good Woody Allen joke that I thought of when I was thinking about that that I was kind of reminded of recently when I was we're talking about the discussion of George Soros, and it's like, okay, so you got George Soros. He's Jewish. He's Reformed Jewish. He's a Nazi. Which, Woody Allen put it better than I could, but it's kind of the problem with George Soros. Really if we're gonna even entertain that conspiracy theory, which I think the beginning and end of it is just that he's a rich guy that funds Democrats. Like, it's not like
he thinks he's doing what's right. Like, he thinks he's helping culture and society get better. And
he's not evil. He's just rich and stupid. Got these weird utopian technocracy ideas that like all these incredibly rich people seem to have. I don't know. And this is definitely something the book gets into a lot. But
there was a really funny line about George Soros in the book, and I'm trying to find it, but I can't.
Did he bring up Soros?
He brought up Soros once.
I was going to say the two big people he talks about in the book are Klaus Schwab and Yuval Harari, which is an interesting combination, and we'll have to go through it. But what was the quote?
I found it. While you may find yourself interested in the attack of free speech or surveillance of your carbon footprint, you might be saying to yourself, I wonder what George Soros is doing these days. That's on page 105.
Okay. I did not catch that when I first read it.
Well, even though he's 91 years old, he decided to show up at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2022 to give his thoughts. Billionaire George Soros warned that Russia's invasion of Ukraine had rattled Europe and could be the start of another world war. Other issues that concern all of humanity, fighting pandemics and climate change, avoiding nuclear war, maintaining global institutions, see, globalists, have had to take a back seat to that struggle, Soros, 91, said Tuesday. Evil endures, evidently. Said Tuesday at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. That's why I say our civilization may not survive. Dun, dun, dun. Which goes to a point that Jones makes throughout the book, is that they have to terrify you in order to get you in the place where where you'll say yes to the things that they're trying to do to control you.
Well, let's talk about before we dive in any further. Let's talk about his credibility. How do we differentiate, what's
Alex Jones and credibility in the same sentence.
So there's a good documentary out there called Mirage Men, and I think about it a lot when in context with Alex Jones, because it's about CIA agents talking about how they completely duped the UFO community, and their strategy is actually really intelligent, and I actually think it's relevant to Alex Jones, but because what they would do is that they would selectively release top secret files to UFO experts. And the way they would do it is they would go to these UFO conventions and they would pick the most egotistical guy they could possibly imagine. It's like, okay, this guy believes he's a god, and we're gonna say, hey, I work with the government and we want to help you disclose secrets, but we can't just tell you them. So we're going to give you files, and one out of every so many of them is going to be fake, and one of them out of so many of them is going to be real. And you're smart enough that you'll figure out which is which. And they would just hand off all these files, a bunch of them real, a bunch of them fake, and then the UFO enthusiasts would just proceed to release all of them. And I think that's kind of the problem with Jones. I think that, there's the meme online. It's like, oh, Alex Jones made a prediction 10 years ago that turns out to be right. Like he was the only one talking about Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2000s when that all stuff was going on. And I think that's kind of the problem with Jones, is that he's got people around him that are probably feeding him complete mistruths, and it's why
Sandy Hook's a big example of that.
Yeah, and that goes for a lot of what he says. I think he probably does have genuine people around him that are telling him weird things that happen just because he's kind of become a flashpoint for, speaking against the power. So you probably are going to be a couple of government whistleblowers that come to him and be like, hey, here's a document, just tell people about it. But then there's going to be like these frigging CIA agents who just walk up to his house and be like, here's 10,000 pages of bull crap. And that's why his stuff is like so out there. He just believes all of it.
Right.
He just says all of it, and after the fact, he realizes, oh, I messed up a little bit. I probably shouldn't have gone that far.
Right,
and that's where that's the most. He says that all the time.
Yeah, like maybe we should mention the Sandy Hook thing because a lot of people would just discount Jones outright because of that.
Yeah, and it was bad that he did it.
Yeah, but if I'm not mistaken, you could maybe correct me. I don't know how much you know about it, but it seems like he thought it was fake at first, and then he kind of said, all right, I have more information. I don't really think that. And then it came up years later when he had already disavowed it. And then everybody went after him years later. Is that?
That's a fairly good summarization. The reason why there's legal charges against him, though, is that he had a guest on his show who was disclosing details about the location of the families, and he didn't go after that guy and say, don't dox those guys. They didn't do anything wrong. It's like, so the problem is the show was responsible for sending out all this this private information, and it was under his headline. And of course, when it came to the actual trial, Jones can't shut his mouth for 5 minutes. So there's all this footage of him just incriminating himself on camera, and his lawyers are just like, I can't work with him, which I don't know. Like Jones says it's like, oh, they're not representing me right. They're trying to screw me over. My lawyers are, they're losing the case to me. I'm like, dude, you're on the stand publicly disagreeing with the judge on tape. It's like, okay. You don't know how to be in a trial if this is what you're doing. But so he's his own worst enemy. He makes stupid mistakes, and he's highly susceptible to incorrect information.
I agree with all that. Yeah.
But yeah, so now
that out of the way now.
Now that we've not prevented us from getting in trouble for discussing this book, but.
At least reasonable people can understand the context and how we see it. So
yes, we like Alex Jones. We do not universally support everything he says because he is as our English major friends would say, he is an unreliable narrator.
He's Holden Caulfield.
But
he's not a phony though. I'll tell you that. If there's anything that
he believes every word coming out of his mouth. That's like half the problem.
Right.
So I guess the subject of this book is, I think my first problem with the book, I'm going to say, is that this is definitely the kind of political book that's not going to age well. It's the kind of topical politics that's 5 years from now no one's going to read. It's like, when like Kellyanne Conway does like the Obama Diaries, the secret history of, it's like those kind of books. It's like no, 5 years from now everyone on the right's going to have moved on from Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset, and it's going to be a different thing.
Well,
so
it depends on if the stuff he says in the book comes true. And that's one of the criticisms that I have, is that he'll take stuff that Klaus Schwab says that can be interpreted in like 100 different ways, some of them charitable, some of them not, and then he'll take them in the very worst possible way and say this is what's going to happen. And the thing is, if the stuff that he lays out in the book starts coming true, then it'll be seen as like a prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably talk about the World Economic Forum, because that's kind of the central polemic entity that the book's going after. Do you follow that stuff at all? I've had to cover it for work, so I'm a little bit more familiar with it than most.
I find it interesting, and I've looked into it a little bit. I just think it's kind of gross.
I think the best thing I've heard about the World Economic Forum came from Elon Musk. The problem with it is it's a group of incredibly intelligent and rich people that universally agree on everything and don't disagree on anything. It's like, so you'll watch live streams, and it's all public. You can watch these live streams where you have these global warming activists and vegan rights people and people like that, and they'll bring on some kind of rabidly over the top voices, and they'll just let them talk for an hour and be like, oh yeah, all the water in Africa is gonna go away. We have to like move the entire population to some other place. And it's like, and everyone's just like, this is fascinating and complex. This is a very nuanced issues. I'm like, these, in a sense that they are like these are people that are ostensibly trying to deal with real world problems with enormous solutions.
Right.
And
that's a word for it.
The problem is just that they have this. I mean, I guess we're gonna have to jump into the word scientism. They have this very technocratic view of the world that says that all these problems can be fixed through progressive social governments, and particularly with what the word that Jones keeps coming back to again is the word stakeholder capitalism, which is not a word he comes up with. It is a common term in the business world that basically just means corporations have to be socially responsible, and we're going to bully corporations to do what we want them to do.
Right.
Which I understand. I guess the young kids would call it woke capitalism. The idea that the government's not going to ban you off Twitter, and the government's not going to trans your kids. The government's not going to do all the stuff we hate. It's going to be the corporations are going to do it because people want it, and the corporations are going to sell it to you on their behalf.
Right. So. The two big issues I have with the World Economic Forum are, one, the scientism, we're basically only going to get out of anything or progress in any sort of way by technology, completely divorced from ironically, from any sort of ethics, because if you have a scientific view of the world, it's really hard to shoehorn ethics into it. It's hard to go from an is to an ought, basically. And the other is that they think that we're in this catastrophe that's happening, and that because it's a catastrophe, one of the quotes that they said was, everything's on the table. And it's like, when you say things like anything's on the table, you're asking for people to think, well, then was COVID-19 released on purpose so they could get some of their agenda through?
I won't go that far, but
I'm saying you're opening it up. I wouldn't go that far either, but you're opening up people to say, if you're saying everything is on the table and you think it's a catastrophe, then you're going to, you called what they say they want to do enormous. It's like, that's a word for it. It's like they view it as a crisis, so then they have these weird, big crisis-minded solutions to things that, if you understand it's not a crisis, then we can just there's one part of the book where Jones talks about you don't want to act like things are a crisis, because if you go into something, you want somebody who's calm and collected and can just come with good solutions, and that's possible right now still. To think that it's a crisis is, well, it's incorrect, and it's also going to make you more susceptible to doing and wanting things that are bad in the long term, because you think, or bad in the short term and long term, because you think that it's a catastrophe and you need to go to drastic measures, whatever those are. And that's dangerous, and it's dystopian, and it's yucky.
And we're gonna come back to this multiple times, but we've already discussed it. But Alex Jones is definitely reading the tea leaves in a specific way,
yes,
where he's saying, the worst case scenario version of this is the Brave New World, which
Harari says that we'll talk about that for sure. Harari's like, yeah, Brave New World, bring it on. It's so gross.
Yeah, it's a complicated. It's the way he builds the argument. It's compelling, but it's also one of those things where it's like, it specifically assumes that Klaus Schwab is either Machiavellian or doesn't realize that these are the problems that he's introducing.
Right.
Which I don't know which. It also assumes that people are actually going to follow Klaus Schwab's ideas, because one of the Alex Jones repeatedly says Schwab has basically released the same book 5 times. It's just like he did. He released a book called Fourth Industrial Revolution in 2016, which kind of outlines his vision for trying to reorganize the world technocratically, and no one read it because it happened in 2016 and the world was on fire. It's like, okay, no one cares about your let's give all the power to the World Economic Forum book in that year. And then he released the same book again in 2018 with a different title, and then he released it again in 2020, 2 months after COVID comes out, and he says, oh, the COVID's a great chance to try using my ideas. And then no one really read it then. And then a year later, he shows up on the World Economic Forum dressed as a frigging samurai. It's just like, we are going to institute the Great Reset. It's like, what the frick?
At the beginning of chapter 2, Jones basically lays that out, and it's actually really funny. Perhaps it's because Klaus Schwab released his first book. That's page 21. Perhaps it's because Klaus Schwab released his first book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, in 2016, with the expectation of Hillary Clinton winning the presidency, and instead got Trump, that Schwab didn't get the world to pay attention to the ideas in his book. Maybe that's why in 2018 he published his second book, Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which he was hoping might have a greater impact. It's like Margaret Mitchell publishing Gone with the Wind in 1936, not having become a massive seller, then coming back a few years later with a sequel, really Gone with the Wind. That was so good.
I think we need to briefly address the weird thing that is his writing. That is, he's actually the book is actually not terribly written.
And yes, and that was the first thing that struck me, and then I mentioned that to you in a text, and you made the observation that it's most certainly ghostwritten.
Yeah, I don't believe for a second he's this articulate.
Right. And if I am, then I guess I've underrated him for a long time, because this is not. It's very coherent. It's actually like it has an intelligent structure. And the way that he says things it's pretty reasonable. Like through the whole thing, there's not anything that's unreasonable.
I wouldn't have expected Alex Jones to have a meaningful, philosophical diatribe about St. Augustine.
Yeah. That's the thing. I actually have a theory on who actually wrote it.
Well, in the acknowledgments, I was going to point out, but who's your theory?
My theory is the guy who basically wrote the last chapter. In the last chapter, Jones goes over the 10 things that Davos wants, that the World Economic Forum wants. What was his name? It starts with a V.
He took notes. He has pages of notes.
I have pages of notes. I have iPads of notes. But the last chapter is about the 10 craziest things that the World Economic Forum wants.
Yeah.
And it was based on an article by some anonymous guy, and I read the article. It reads just like The Great Reset. So I'm almost sure that it was this guy that actually wrote the book.
That's an interesting theory. Although if you jump to the acknowledgments, the last paragraph of the book, he says, "Finally, I'd like to thank writer extraordinaire Kent Heckenlively. I am deeply grateful for his help in condensing and organizing the research presented here, and look forward to working with him on future projects." So I took the effort of looking up Kent Heckenlively, and I found he has a Twitter account. It's private, so he didn't want feedback. But he's I don't know who this guy is, but my assumption is that it was this Kent dude.
Vigilant Citizen was the name of the person who did this article, but the whole thing, and that's another of my criticisms of the book, is that it kind of reads like Alex Jones told this guy to write this book, and he's basically padding it as much as he can. There's a bunch of short paragraphs to make the pages longer, and short sentences as paragraphs. Really long block quotes. I mean, these are all classic things that I used to use in my term papers in college. It's like, have really long block quotes. Like, he basically, what would you say, an eighth of the Klaus Schwab books are in, the actual text is in The Great Reset.
There's a lot of it.
And then the last chapter is this Vigilant Citizens article, basically just repurposed for the book. So it's I can imagine the guy being the ghostwriter and being like, oh God, I still have to get 300, I still have to get 1,500 words. I'll just tack my own article onto
the way ghostwriting, as I understand it, generally works is you kind of just talk to someone for 10 hours and then you condense it down in their voice in a more structured way. That it's not like it isn't them talking, which is why this definitely reads in the voice of Alex Jones. Mm-hmm. You can definitely hear Jones talking when you're reading it. But it's weird because it's altogether more coherent than I was expecting. But at the same time, it just goes on and on. Like you said, it's like, oh, the ghostwriter got bored. It's like I can definitely tell because there are parts of it that are slow. I got bored a couple times, but
you're like, what was the part where you said, I hope there's not another 5 chapters about... It was something that had to do with... the thing that Jimmy Carter was a part of? He goes on about...
I got to the part where he talks about Jimmy Carter joining the Trilateral Commission.
Trilateral Commission, that's right.
I just freaking lost it. It's like, okay, here we are. We're talking Jimmy Carter conspiracies. Jimmy Carter's going to be freaking dead by the time this podcast goes up, and I'm reading about Jimmy Carter joining the Trilateral Commission.
It's funny, I saw you have a birds aren't real thing on your computer screen. I saw an Alex Jones meme in the last week where it was Alex Jones looking all confused, and it was, she's a 10, but she thinks birds are real.
Yes, I saw that.
That's too good.
That's the most ironic conspiracy theory, though. It's the guy who created it said he created it as a joke, and then it just got completely out of hand, and then all these people are like, why did you create Birds Aren't Real? And he's like, it was a joke. It's satire. New York Times profiled him. I didn't mean to do it. But anyway. So we kind of talked about the the Schwab stuff.
I actually found that the book didn't really get super interesting. He's building up his argument, which I think is it's coherent and it's interesting. That the World Economic Forum basically just like the whole globalist conspiracy he always had, wants to control you in these various different ways with technology. China being a good example of the surveillance state thing that they do. But it just wasn't that interesting until the Harari chapter. I thought was super interesting.
At the end of I write notes in books in pencil when I'm reading them, and towards the end of the first chapter, I just wrote, "Jones talks like an early 2000s lib railing against big pharma."
You're not wrong.
Although I did notice, I thought a lot about the general philosophy of Jones, because as I was reading it, because this is kind of, if he wanted to like present an alternate view of the world, this is going to be the place to do it. But he really doesn't offer like a strong vision of what he actually believes for the most part. He's kind of just railing, and as I was reading between the lines, I came up with a term that I thought kind of described his worldview, and I called it Epicurean theism, which is. He's kind of this stereotypical guy that he's got like the boomer mindset is like, I just want to like, hang out with hot chicks and grill and love my country. It's like that kind of
nature.
Yeah, it's not even that. It's just like this kind of obscene like baby boomer sentiment that's all about just like how great my life is and how great America is and individualism and guns and rah rah and I love all those things, but it kind of feels like basic stuff. He's not really outlining a philosophy at all. Like
the main thread through the book, and he says this more explicitly towards the end, is that in order to fight against this globalism, what we have to do is focus on the individual. And you need to understand that your freedom is important, and you need to use your freedom to fight against this and to fight for for freedom and for good values. You need to be a good person yourself. Which
tell me as a post-liberal Catholic, what do you think about individualism?
I have some issues with it.
Well, that would be my only thing. We were talking a little about the Michael Knowles book, Speechless, and we both kind of came away with my takeaway was just how much he's arguing the main problem with modern conservatism is it doesn't articulate an actual worldview. It's just kind of a negation of a worldview, which gets dragged along. So I'm like, that's if Alex Jones actually wanted to challenge that, it would be better than his message needs. His message is kind of like, I love meat and Jesus and women. But
that's Andrew Tate, isn't it?
And no, Andrew Tate would not differentiate between the women and the meat. So it's like, you're just a piece of meat, but. Yeah, I guess he's kind of got that reject perfection, embrace flawed humanity kind of vibe to him, which it's just very homely, but he's not advocating for anything crazy. He's mostly just complaining. So that's a bit tangential, but I just noticed that in my notes.
Right. He's basically saying what he thinks is wrong and what he thinks is going on, and with the World Economic Forum and basically the whole thread through the first quarter of him, he's talking about that. Is that they want to subsume your individuality and your freedom, and the way that he wants to combat that is basically just just saying no to that and understanding that it's there. And that's where it's like it comes off as kind of like just diagnosing the problem, but I think that's kind of just the point of the book is like saying that it's there and this is how we need to fight it. He doesn't really go into, maybe that could be the second book.
Maybe.
The next Great Reset. the Greater Reset.
The Tao of Alex. What does it mean to be Alex Jones? I did notice, I think it was either chapter 2 or 3 where he does the extended interview with Patrick Wood. He actually does an interesting job tying back the ideas of the World Economic Forum to Woodrow Wilson. Which is great because the world needs to be constantly reminded that Woodrow Wilson is the worst.
Yes.
But
and his wife, who was basically president for.
Well, there you go.
Chunk of his. One thing that this book constantly reminded me of through the whole thing is the Dennis Prager line that people don't want to be free; they want to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's the trouble: is that the World Economic Forum is giving what could be seen by a lot of people as a very attractive way of being taken care of. But the shadow side of that is you're going to be sent to the digital gulag if you're not in step with everything, or the Harari stuff about the caste system, basically. Like, man, that chapter really knocked me out.
In some ways, it's quite sad. As one might say, these globalists suffer from a God-shaped hole in their heart. Where God used to be, they are desperately trying to fill the void with the God of scientism. They do not engage with moral and spiritual complexities of life, and there most closely resemble a general who conducts a battle far from the front, forever blind to what's happening at the tip of the spear, where success and failure is determined. They live an antiseptic life, devoid of joy and suffering, and pass from this world with little or no spiritual development.
You know, I love the guy, but there's a 0% chance he wrote that sentence. Like,
I was gonna
0% chance.
That was I told you the other day. That sounds like Thomas Sowell in Intellectuals in Society, which I don't think Alex Jones has read Intellectuals in Society. No. But it's essentially the same sentiment that the problem with intellectuals is they don't pay for the consequences of their actions. It's like they're so devoid from what actually happens on the ground for when they make these huge decisions that. But coming at it, it sounds better when Thomas Sowell says it. So
right, it's a little more palatable.
Yeah. Do you want to just jump into the Harari section, because I think that's kind of that's probably the best thing in the book. Right.
I do think that Dennis Prager quote basically sums up what he's saying in the entire first portion of the book about Schwab. It's like, and that's also where I disagree with Jones. Well, I don't know if I disagree. It's just I'm not sure if I buy his argument that everything that Schwab says should be taken in the most negative way possible. I feel like there's a lot of wiggle room for maybe he's just saying, like, even the stuff that he quotes, it seems like Schwab's saying, these are the problems that I see, these are the ways that I want to, that I think are the best way to combat the stuff that's going on. It's not, and he doesn't say, this is what has to happen, this is what needs to happen, this is what I'm going to, bring in from the top down. And so I feel like Schwab's like more having a discussion about where he thinks that things should go, where Jones takes it as we're going to do these things no matter what. And not only are we going to do what the World Economic Forum says they want to do, but in the absolute worst, most tyrannical way.
There's a book called Project Hail Mary, which is it's a science fiction novel about a kind of an end of the world scenario where this microbe that begins accumulating on the sun, and the more of it accumulates, it's like it's a bacterial life form, but the more of it accumulates, the more it dims the sun slightly, and the scientists calculate that within 20 years it's going to dip the sunlight by 20% and freeze the Earth, and basically the governments of the world get together and they just pick one woman and say, you have complete access to everything and every resource on the planet, and you have whatever you do to save the Earth in 20 years, no matter what it takes, and you can do whatever you want and you will not be punished. And I kind of think that's what Alex Jones thinks Klaus Schwab is.
Right, that's a very good analogy. Yeah.
It's we're going to give every single this guy complete control over the world and assume he's going to use it for the most negative possible version of reality.
Right.
But I that said, I don't think Klaus Schwab's version of reality is good.
Right.
Which is what we'll get into now.
Right. If anybody's interested in this book at all, I would say just read the Harari chapter, because I think that's it is the most illuminating part of it. It gets to the heart of his argument really well, too. It just, honestly, this whole book could have just been that essay. And
do you know anything about Harari outside of this book? Or
no.
So I know a little bit about Harari. He's extremely popular particularly among people who care about like the social sciences. Like one of my friends, the Nashville pamphleteer, she's constantly complaining about going on dates with guys who just bring up Sapiens all the time. It's like it's one of those like Bugman books that like you'll see it at the airport a lot. Like if you're going to like those dollar books or those cheap bookstores at the airport, like Sapiens is a really common book they have there.
Whenever I'd go to Half Price Books and I'd go to the nonfiction section, it would come up and be like, "Oh, this looks kind of interesting," and I'd read the cover and I'd be like, "Ugh."
Yeah, I mean, I never had much of a temptation to read the book. Like, it's one of those things where I just assumed it was going to be one of those Jonathan Haidt kind of style explorations of human sociology and like, oh, the history of humankind from whatever this, is the trendy way to read it.
I think Jonathan Haidt has more of an outside approach, where Harari has a very definite like worldview that he brings into what he finds.
Well, Haidt is a mainstream social scientist, though. Yeah. Like, he's not controversial. He's true. The only thing that's nominally controversial about him is the fact that he's pro wisdom literature, which is basically just his way of saying, if you're not going to be religious, you have to find another way to organize society, which is...
He also has, like, an anti-woke streak to him, too, I think, right?
Yeah, but there's kind of a trendy way to do it. Like, he still writes for The Atlantic. Like, he's not that far outside of the what is it called?
Mainstream?
He's a mainstream social scientist. He can go to the cocktail parties. He's not crazy, but Harari, on the other hand, he seems like he's that crap insane.
If somebody was said, yeah, this guy actually thinks that Brave New World sounds like a good idea, I would say, oh, come on. This guy doesn't actually think that. You're just reading into it. But he literally says that.
Well, the chapter is called Yuval Harari, RoboCop for the Empire.
Great. Jones probably came up with that one. Like, I feel like that's very Jonesian.
Yeah, let's see. Can we find the quote where he talks about Brave New World? So I think that we need to kind of... This is the kind of chapter where we need to, let the words speak for themselves, because this is crazy. But, like, just to begin with, like, Harari just strikes me as, like, the kind of guy who's, like, a complete modern. Like, there's no sentimentality to him. He just kind of views humanity in this very sterile, scientific way, where it's like, there's no meaning to life. There's no faith. There's no reason to believe in anything. We're just meat sacks. We're all gonna be taken over, but turned into cyborgs soon, and then we're gonna, the new religion will be created by Silicon Valley, and it's
right. At least he has the guts to come out and like say that, like, because a lot of people don't understand that the religious aspect of Silicon Valley.
Yeah. He's very, very forthcoming. Where's that stupid quote?
I think I'm finding on page 124, maybe?
This is a long chapter.
It is, and it was the most engrossing for me.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
In Aldous Huxley's dystopian novel, Brave New World, this is Harari speaking. Published in 1932, the height of the Great Depression, happiness is the supreme value, and psychiatric drugs replace the populace and ballot as the foundation of politics. Every day, each person takes a dose of Soma, a synthetic drug that makes people happy without harming their productivity and efficiency. The world state that governs the entire globe is never threatened by wars, revolutions, strikes, or demonstrations, because all people are supremely content with their current conditions, whatever they may be. Huxley's vision is far more troubling than George Orwell's 1984. Huxley's world seems monstrous to most readers, but it's hard to explain why. Everyone is happy all the time. What could be wrong with that?
Actually, it's not hard to explain why Huxley's world seems monstrous to most readers. It's because it is monstrous. That's what Jones says right after. And my Alex Jones turned into Hulk Hogan there. Sorry.
Well, I mean,
let me tell you something, brother. Nobody should be looking to Brave New World for what they want their utopia to be, brother.
They're both Republicans. I mean, that's just like, what the frick? It's like, oh, Brave New World's a good idea, actually, because there's no wars in Brave New World.
Like, I was thinking, as you were reading that, there should be, like, some kind of, like, happy classical music playing behind it. It's like, the world state that governs the entire globe and is not threatened by wars and revolutions. Like, oh my god. I'm trying to see what my note on that was. Oh, my note on that was just OMFG.
But that's kind of... Like, the thing that, like, going forward from this, it's kind of the theme, is that Schwab and Harari both seem to think that the worst thing that can happen to the world is that any sort of conflict or disagreement happen, and that conflict and disagreement isn't meted out by some sort of intermediary power that can work on their behalf. Right. Like, it's pure technocracy. Basically, they think that technology is going to step in and be the thing that stops all wars, ends climate change, ends all disease, They're gonna install an iPhone into your arm and just let it, and it's gonna do everything for you.
Bring the squalid dystopia of John Lennon's Imagine into reality.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's
the one thing about some of the book that you could maybe say Alex Jones actually wrote it is some of the parts are really funny, and I mentioned a couple of them. There's one in the Harari chapter that's really good, and I'm just going to read it at length because it's just great. This is Harari, the quote of Harari's that he's using. There is nothing new about biological engineering per se. People have been, this is on page, if you want to follow along, page 126.
I think we had different page counts.
Yeah, probably. Oh well. There is nothing new about biological engineering per se. People have been using it for millennia in order to reshape themselves and other organisms. A simple example is castration. Humans have been castrating bulls for perhaps 10,000 years in order to create oxen. Oxen are less aggressive and are thus easier to train to pull plows. Humans also castrated their young males to create soprano singers with enchanting voices and eunuchs who could safely be trusted with overseeing the Sultan's harem. Now this is Jones's response.
But perhaps the men... Is this one?
Many are worried.
Many are worried about losing their First and Second Amendment rights to the New World Order by being prompted by Klaus Schwab and his globalists. But perhaps the men of the Old World Order should be equally fearful of losing their balls if Schwab and his minions develop an ear for enchanting voices or decide that harems are a good idea.
Oh my god. Men of the Old World Order should be equally fearful of losing their balls. Oh my god. That's just funny right there. I'm sorry.
Oh goodness, I'm sorry.
I don't blame you, man.
It's all like this.
Yes, it's all like this.
Harari just ends up talking about, like, we're going to turn everyone into cyborgs, and your life's going to be better when you're a machine.
And also, liberalism is bad because it's not scientific. One of the quotes in the, this is probably towards the end of the chapter. I'll just read the whole thing.
This one killed me too. This is Harari speaking, not Jones. The Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, a U.S. military research agency, is developing cyborgs out of insects.
They're developing cyborgs out of insects!
Alex Jones
that sounds like something Alex Jones would say.
People go mad because they read this stuff.
So this is Harari speaking. In 2016, the world is dominated by the liberal package of individualism, human rights, democracy, and free market. You can kind of hear him seething about how awful all those things are. Yet 21st century science, they should capitalize science, and it can go back to the... wasn't there a South Park episode about science being God?
Oh yeah, Cartman Goes to the Future, where there's two factions of atheists that are fighting over what their society should be named.
Hail science and like, oh my science, like.
Oh yeah, one of them is a collection of otters.
Yes, the atheistic otters. Oh, it's so good. Yeah,
Atheist Alliance. It has 3 A's.
Yet 21st century science is undermining the foundations of the liberal order. Because science does not deal with questions of value, it cannot determine whether liberals are right in valuing liberty more than equality, or in valuing the individual more than the collective. However, like every other religion, liberalism too is based not only on abstract ethical judgments, but also on what it believes to be factual statements. And these factual statements just don't stand up to a rigorous scientific scrutiny. That's scientism, like, bar none. It's like, if you happen to be a liberal that actually has been listening to the podcast this long, how do you feel about all of your values basically being subsumed by whatever science dictates? That's what leads you to eugenics. And that was the first thing that I noticed in the chapter. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, here's another Jones quote.
Again, Harari reminds me of a crazed religious zealot, so disgusting by the flesh that he only wants to exist in the spiritual world, but because Harari recognizes no god or spiritual place of existence, he tries to fill the god-shaped hole with his soul with technology.
Which made me think, hi, I'm James Lindsay, and I want to talk to you about Gnosticism.
Right? That's exactly right.
James Lindsay, you're like in Chattanooga. Come on the show.
We'll have you on.
Yeah, well, there's beer in the fridge. You can come on, and we'll talk about Gnosticism. But
I was making the point that a lot of the Harari stuff and the scientism in general, it leads the way for eugenics. Like, eugenics is just a natural outgrowth of scientism, which was a huge thing in the early 20th century too. But kind of early in the chapter, this is a Harari quote: "According to the science of biology, people were not created; they have evolved, and they certainly did not evolve to be equal. The idea of equality is inextricably, I have a degree in words, I can pronounce it however the hell I want, intertwined with the idea of creation. The Americans got the idea of equality from Christianity, which argues that every person has a divinely created soul, and that all souls are equal before God." Once again, you can kind of hear him seething about how awful that is. "However, if we do not believe in the Christian myths about God, creation, and souls, what does it mean that all souls are equal? Evolution is based on difference, not on equality." That is literally the eugenic mindset right there. It is. You always lose an argument as soon as you mention Hitler, but that's Hitlerian.
Here's another one. "To the best of our scientific understanding, determinism and randomness are divided the entire cake between them, leaving not a crumb for freedom. The sacred word freedom turns out to be, just like soul, a hollow term empty of any discernible meaning. Free will exists only in the imaginary stories we humans have invented." That's not Alex Jones talking.
Right. Another one, this is another quote from Harari. "The third threat to liberalism is that some people will remain both indispensable and undecipherable, but will constitute a small and privileged elite of upgraded humans. These superhumans," why doesn't he just say Superman? Why doesn't he just say, like, Ubermensch? Because
they all but say it later on. So.
It's very Nietzschean, a lot of this stuff is. "Will enjoy unheard of abilities and unprecedented creativity, which will allow them to go on making many of the most important decisions in our world. They will perform crucial services for the system, while the system could neither understand or manage them. However, most humans will not be upgraded, and will consequently become an inferior caste, dominated by both computer algorithms and the new superhumans." That is scary dystopian shit. How is this stuff, like, in airports and, like, mainstream? This is gross.
In his chapter, The Great Decoupling, this is what Harari predicts for the 21st century. 1. Humans will lose their economic and military usefulness. Hence, the economic and political system will stop attaching much value to them. 2. The system will continue to find value in humans collectively, but not in unique individuals. And 3. The system will find value in some unique individuals, but these will constitute a new, elite, upgraded superhuman rather than the massive population. And my comment next to it was Sam Hyde 2070.
Yeah.
Which is obviously my first thought was... the human beings will be placed by vast pleasure domes but used exclusively by the Excelsiites, while grovelers dig for neoplasm underground. Like you sound like freaking Sam Hyde making a TED talk up.
Right.
This just proves that great ideas are sometimes horrible ideas. Look what we're gonna be reverent. 9/11. Now look what those people did with 12 people with no weapons. It just proves great ideas are horrible ideas sometimes. It's like, you sound like Sam Hyde. Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah, what was I had a note on that one too.
Like we both zeroed in on the same quote. Best Comedy 2022. This book.
Yeah, I basically just said that it's the new Nietzscheanism, basically.
And they have you seen the stuff going around lately with people like saying that like the Christian nationalists are just Nietzschean? It's like, oh, they only care about power. They're just the new Nietzscheans. Like that's the new buzzword going around.
Right? Yeah, I didn't know that.
I'm like,
you're more plugged in than I am.
Well, yeah, I like Twitter.
Andrew Klavan had a great analogy for what Twitter is. Twitter is like when you sign in and it's like you're opening the gates of hell and you're like, get me out! And you have to sign out because you're just looking at hell. That's how I view Twitter.
I used to run the Screwtape account on Twitter until I realized that it was hopeless to try to negotiate with people and there was no point in satirizing people that were beyond satirizing. So it's like, wow, I'm just getting depressed reading this. But
beyond
yeah,
parody is what we call it.
The key to Twitter is to turn off all your notifications and then block and then mute everyone that's annoying, and suddenly your Twitter is nothing but your friends and cat videos, and your life becomes really wonderful.
Right? Yeah.
It's like just nonstop dopamine hits.
Another. this is right after that section where he talks about in the Great Decoupling about the 21st century. This is Jones. You can't say that Harari doesn't have big plans. It's just that they're insane. The ravings of a dictator in training. One wonders how he might retain the simplest of human reactions. Does he tell his significant other that he has no free will? I wonder how his partner feels, though, about the whole eternally young cyborg sexless and non-breeding plans. They must have prompted at least a few discussions in their relationship.
Oh yeah, Harari's vision for humanity is basically a sexless cyborg that's incapable of reproduction and eternally connected to computers. So
and that's one thing that I kind of wrote in my notes a few times is I don't think Harari is so much saying what he wants sometimes as much as what he thinks is going to happen, which I hope not.
I mean that people have said forever that like the future of humanity is like we turn into like a non-bodied spiritual blob. It's like you ever see the Futurama episode where like all of human evolution happens over the course of like a day because it's robots, and the final stage of robot evolution is they evolve past the need for bodies and become transformative spirits that just wander the universe forever. So like that's kind of that's kind of the vision you get. It's like this 2001: A Space Odyssey vision of human evolution where the next step of humanity is to evolve past the need for bodies. It's like, you don't need that silly thing. You'll just become an immortal conscious that lives forever on in machines or within the fabric of the universe, depending on if you're on drugs or if you're, a Silicon Valley tech bro.
Right. I'm going to give a quote, and we'll give the audience a couple seconds to try to figure out who it's from because it's hilarious, and I think that... I'm a big fan of everything Harari has written, and his latest is no exception. That'd be Bill Gates, of course. And I just said, of effing course. That was my entire note on that section.
I'm going to have to... I'm going to formally distance myself from it. So, dear Lord.
That great farmer, Bill Gates, because he owns the most farmland in America of any single person. It's still like under 1%. I mean, that's actually a quote. Is he
actually using the farmland, or is he one of those like buy farmland and like let the earth reclaim it types?
I don't know.
Because I've seen that there's a popular movement by both the government and certain billionaires basically to buy up tons of farmland and just let it overgrow because they want to stop they want to reclaim a lot of farmland that's been overused or something.
Right.
But they're basically just taking away land that people can use for anything. It's like, okay, people aren't going to have land anymore.
Right. I think to maybe put a bow on the Harari section, I think he really gets kind of to the heart of it in this part. This is Jones. Homo Deus literally means man is God. That is what the globalists are pushing. If there is one thing that religion has done, it is to cause people to consider things outside of themselves. It is religion that caused people to worry about feeding the poor, educating the young, removing people from slavery, and making sure that all enjoy equal opportunity. At its best, religion breaks down walls, requiring people to see others as fellow children of God, all equally valuable. Once again, this is all pretty high stuff for what I assume Jones was. Like, even if there was a ghostwriter, he got the stuff from him. By agreeing that all people have value, there can be no impulse to harm or rid ourselves of them. The more people embrace equality and freedom, the closer they are to God's natural order. When one understands the philosophical underpinnings of a belief in God, it becomes clear that these globalists are nothing less than an opposition force to that belief. What else would you call an opposition force to God other than devils and demons? And my
literal demons.
My note on that was literally Antichrist. That's literally what it is.
I mean, I'm happy to be one of those people that says that hideous strength is a documentary. So go read the Space Trilogy and you'll get that reference. But
I guess one thing about Harari that we should also say is that Jones has the theory that Harari's kind of like backtracking on a lot of his stuff and is like thinking that it might be a little too far. Did you notice that?
Towards the end of the the end of the chapter, he kind of backs up. Although he does say in his most recent book, Harari, in this brave new world, the world government uses advanced biotechnology and social engineering to make sure that everyone is always content and no one has reason to rebel. It is as if Joy, Sadness, and the other characters in Inside Out have been turned into loyal government agents. There is therefore no need for a secret police, concentration camps, or ministry of love. I hope my window's open right now. My neighbors are going to think I'm a nut job. But indeed, in Ministry of Love from Orwell's 1984, indeed, Huxley's genius consists on showing you that you can control people far more securely through love and pleasure than through fear and pain.
Aww.
So the Brave New World is a great idea after all. But yeah, he does kind of back away from some of the ideas in the last in his third book, but it's, I don't know. It's non-committal. Although I will say I did think that one of the best quotes in the book comes from the end of the chapter, where Jones is actually really conciliatory to Harari and Schwab, and basically says, like, I don't, Harari's trying to turn me into RoboCop, but I don't think he's a bad guy. I don't think he's beyond salvation. And here's his quote. The greatest victory is not to destroy your enemy, but to welcome him back when he realizes the error of his ways. So
right.
It just ends up being like part of what we'll talk about as we wrap up the book, but just this kind of weirdly, like, the better part of his nature coming out and saying, like, I don't want people to rise up and attack Klaus Schwab. I want Klaus Schwab to change his mind.
Right. Like, it kind of appears like Harari might be doing.
Yeah.
One of the quotes from Harari towards the end of that chapter that I actually said 100% true, and it kind of reminded me of a lot of arguments that Scott Adams has. As technology...
Famous person! Maybe we need to do Win Bigly next.
How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big is a great book. I like all of his books, but with Scott Adams... I have a thing for anti-heroes, in case you can't tell. Scott Adams was an anti-hero until last week.
Yeah, let's just grab onto the third rail. Just
the first year I moved to Nashville, so 2 years ago, I read a book on Putin and a book on Robert E. Lee in the same year. Because I was like, I'm on an anti-hero kick here.
My anti-hero arc is going great.
Right. And I was also watching documentaries about Mussolini. The first person who did professional wrestling promos. Have you ever seen that gif where he's just like, he's got this total professional wrestling.
I will say Mussolini is careful with my words. He's one of the more interesting people in the Second World War, just because he tends to get associated with Hitler when he really wasn't that. He was just kind of doing his own thing. He was Hitler before Hitler was Hitler. He wasn't in some ways. I mean, he wasn't like totalitarian in the way Hitler was. He was just like this strongman guy, and he was like weird. Like Jonah Goldberg goes into this in liberal fascism, but he was like super popular in the United States. Like he was buddies with Chesterton. I mean, he was buddy with Chesterton. There were songs about him by like popular singers. He was in American movies. Well, I think then he invaded Ethiopia and everyone freaking turned on him. So what people just see him through the lens they see him as like Hitler's puppet, which he was at the end. But it's like before Hitler, like he had the power and the whole fascist thing was started by him, and then Hitler was kind of like took that into his crazy direction. Yeah, read liberal fascism before it sounds like I'm being too conciliatory towards fascists. Like you need to. Yeah, I'm just saying the context is more complicated. We don't like any fascists. No. Left, right, whatever. The problem with the fascists... Well, we can probably discuss this, but the problem with the fascists is that they were a progressive fad. Like, it's like people wanted, like, we're gonna be a post-democratic, post-liberal order where, the strongman fixes everything. And the problem with the fascists is they didn't go far enough. I'm just kidding. Motherfucker! We had to say something controversial on a podcast about Alex Jones. The book isn't controversial enough? By the way, I don't actually believe that, friends. It was a good line. I remember a podcast. I'm not going into that, but we've hit the basement, buddy. They're just gonna friggin' cut like individual words out to make it sound like being like, I love fascists. Right. It's like the Homer Simpson interview where it's like, I was just staring at her, sweet can. or the chef episode of South Park. I just want to make sweet love to the children. Cutting audio up never stops being funny, but this is so. I actually said this was 100% true. What Harari says here. As technology improved, two things happened. First, as the flint knives gradually evolved into nuclear missiles, destabilizing the social order became more dangerous. Second, as cave paintings gradually evolved into television broadcasts, it became easier to delude people.
In the future, algorithms might bring this process to completion, making it well nigh possible for people to observe the reality about themselves. I think this is true, but scary. It will be the algorithms that will decide for us who we are and what we should do about ourselves. For a few more years or decades, we still have choice. If we want to make the effort, we can still investigate who we really are. But if we want to make use of this opportunity, we had better do it now. And it's like, I actually don't have as much faith in AI as Harari seems to, and that Scott Adams does too, but that's a scary possibility.
Yeah, I'm not entirely on the train that says that AI will become powerful enough to completely predict all human knowledge and stuff, and all that stuff, because the early AIs we're seeing right now, they can barely source information correctly.
Right.
Like they're very primitive. Like they can do really impressive things, but it's just predictive stuff. It's not on the line of being sentient or capable of really completely rewiring the human brain, which a lot of these people, they think that AI is going to be able to just scan a human brain, recreate it down to the neuron, and fully understand us. And I'm like, that doesn't understand the human brain, because humans don't know the human brain, and AI can only do what you plug it to do. So there's an instant problem right there. Is, well, human beings are chaos machines. We come up with all sorts of ways to break our conditioning and go outside of the system.
Right.
Because we're evolved to be, cave people. We're evolved to be hunter-gatherers, and that's what we default to. So
this was a point that Andrew Klavan actually made in his last podcast, which he mentions Harari and talks about a lot of the stuff we're talking about. I thought it was kind of interesting.
Maybe he's reading the book.
He has written. He's actually talked about Harari quite a bit on his podcast.
I meant this one.
Oh, right. I don't know if he's ever met, or if he's ever read any Alex Jones.
If I had to guess anyone at the Daily Wire who's met Alex Jones, I'd bet it's Michael Knowles.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say that because Michael Knowles constantly praising Alex Jones for being right. So.
Well, he calls him the shirtless vitamin salesman.
I mean that would be a heck of an interview if he did. What's the interview show he does where he brings on a guy and just asks him
yes or no?
Michael Knowles.
Alex Jones for yes or no. Oh my God, that'd be so great.
Michael Knowles, you can make it happen.
Yes!
Break the internet.
We know people who know him. We have to get on that.
Okay, Nashville Chestertons. We need to make this a thing.
We've already had influence on national politics. I think the least we can do is get Alex Jones.
Do we want to break that? Do we want to break that story?
Nah, I don't think so.
I want to break that story because it's interesting.
It's super cool, but we can't. No, I don't think so. I want to go back to the point I
mercilessly bully Wesley P. Worrell on Twitter in order to get him to break the story of the century. But
I haven't been on Twitter in forever, and that's like literally the only thing that Wesley P. Worrell has is a Twitter account with like 15 followers.
I'd like to remind you that Wesley P. Worrell only exists on paper. So
that's which is the way I like it. But Klavan basically said that AI can't become human or replace what humanity does, because all it can do is take inputs and use that. Whereas the human brain, like with art, for example, it's like an expression of our humanity, and the only way that arts progress is that we take it into ways that we never saw that we had done before. Yeah. Whereas AI can't do something that's never been done before, because all it can do is what it's programmed to do. And that's actually one of the reasons I stopped listening to Scott Adams months ago, was because
before he started dropping statistics.
Ironically, I've been listening to him since that happened again, but it's more just to watch the show. It's like a very entertaining movie to me.
Oh, I love a good heel turn.
Right, that's exactly right. Especially when the heel thinks he's like the hero, which he does. It's super fascinating to me. But
this is some Undertaker coming out of the wind stuff.
Right.
The Undertaker.
But Klavan basically made now you got me talking about. Now I just want to talk about
pattern recognition on AI.
Now I just want to talk about WWE and wrestling.
No. I don't know that much about WWE. I just watched like 2 matches.
You dropped The Undertaker. That was pretty good. That's a pretty good name drop for someone who doesn't know WWE very well.
Yeah, that's about it. So,
but we can move on. I think.
Please move on from WWE. We have to move on to the shirtless vitamin salesman.
You know who really appreciates WWE? Jordan Peterson. He loves the drama. He thinks it's like basically like the Jungian archetype of story, like played out over and over and over again.
I mean, Donald Trump is famously a WWE guy. It's like,
he's in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I mean, that tells you a lot about his personality right there. But
he's a total heel. He always really has been. Which is kind of funny.
Oh,
he's kind of heel that rappers want to rap about because he's cool, you know.
Go watch the WWE clips of Donald Trump on YouTube. They're very funny.
They are.
There's like video of like him shaving a guy. It's like what the frick?
The hair versus hair match. Oh man.
It's yeah. Anyway, Andrew Clavin on Yuval Harari.
I think I actually wrapped up that point. Like I thought I had something else to say, but so it goes.
Yeah, the chapters after that are a little bit more just specifically themed. So, chapter 6, you probably won't be face a firing squad in the Great Reset, but you may be put in a digital gulag.
Digital gulag, yeah.
So he's kind of talking about the way technology has kind of been used to shut down protest movements. He talks, a lot of this initially is about the Canadian trucker protest, which, you know, people should still be mad about that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, Justin Trudeau shutting down the bank accounts of protesters when he's destroying their livelihoods, and they weren't even like capital rioting. They were just sitting around Toronto in their semi trucks.
Right.
It's like the honking.
There's of the theme chapters, I found this one the most interesting because it does talk about technological developments that might be coming down the pipeline that are kind of scary sounding. Like the state and a smartphone, which aims by 2024 to have 100% of all government services available online, with 20% of services provided automatically without the intervention of an official. So it's like the technology is getting there to where it'll be easy, conceivably, for the government to control you digitally.
Yeah, he talks about the Jerome Powell's digital dollar proposals, which I've done a little bit of research into that for work, and I don't like it. It's, do you know about the digital dollar?
No.
So basically, the Federal Reserve wants to create a digital online-only version of the U.S. dollar that functions the same way blockchain technology works. So it's all completely recorded and accessible by the Federal Reserve, which effectively means that the federal, which I'm not even quoting Jones on this. This is what I've read independently. A lot of crypto bros talk about this all the time, but it effectively will give the Federal Reserve complete access to every single one of your transactions, and in theory, it would allow them to decline transactions they don't want you to spend on. So if there's a political cause that the government doesn't like, if there's a business it doesn't like, if there's a charity it doesn't like, all it has to do is effectively cut transactions to those things, and then your money won't go there, or your digital currency is going to start disappearing. Or in the worst case scenario, they've talked about the possibility that there could be an expiration date on digital currency, meaning you get paid $20,000 from your job, but 5 years from now, that $20,000 in the bank will disappear if you leave it there. So it dissolves the concept of capital accumulation, and means you have to constantly be spending money. Which I think that there might have been a couple of countries that have experimented with that, but it is a horrible idea for anyone that actually cares about, you know, the people having access to finances or to like capital or anything in the future.
Right, and it's like how far is it from that to the social credit system, basically?
I mean, an American social credit system would be infinitely worse than the Chinese one, just because the Chinese social credit system, it actually accounts for forgiveness. Like, that's one of the weird things about it. If you mess up in China too much, you lose access to your job, public transportation, a mortgage access, and basically everything. And if you hang out with other people, their their social credit score goes down too. But it goes up over time. So if you stop doing the things that made it go down, it'll start just going back to the neutral until you get your rights back. It just takes like a year or something crazy like that. So,
but like, what if the things that you're doing to get the social credit score down aren't really that bad?
It's mostly mundane things, like if you buy too many video games, you lose social credit. If you help someone cross the street, you gain credit. Like, it's very comprehensive, but it's
talk about Orwellian. My God.
Yeah, China's a terrifying government, but at least there's a pathway back. If this got instituted in America with our current government, you know, there's no pathway back. Like, right. They're gonna tie a social credit score to your Twitter account, and every time you criticize the government, you lose 5 points. You're never gonna get back. or if you say something politically incorrect, you're going to lose social credit, and you're never getting it back because there's no concept of forgiveness in the progressive worldview.
Right.
J.K. Rowling is being absolutely destroyed right now, and the people that are destroying her are never going to forgive her because she crossed the line.
Well, that's one of the points Matt Walsh makes about how he never has any respect for anyone who apologizes, even if they should have apologized, because even if you apologize, they're not going to love you, they're not going to bring you back, they're not going to accept you, they're not going to forgive you. So it's like, what's the point? There is no point.
To them, anyway. I mean,
right.
For a Christian to apologize, that's like the core of our belief system. And, you know, when China does it better than us, that's not a great indicator of where things are going. It's like...
Well, don't use that word us too loosely.
Well, America being us. Like... I mean, if our
I feel like that's not a broadly American thing.
Well, we're effectively the world is a giant American empire because we have soft power over Europe and most of the other countries in the world because of our cultural influence. So when I say America, like this is something I've heard, I have British friends who complain about is that America has too much influence over their politics.
Right.
Like there's like Black Lives Matter riots happening in UK. Like no one's been killed by a British cop in 50 years. Right. It's like, what the frick? Why are there like Malcolm X paintings in like random like, UK streets?
Right.
That tells you about how overpowering our culture is to them. It's like
right. Well, I was just speaking more to your point about lack of forgiveness. Like I don't think that's a broadly American thing.
No, but it's a broadly progressive thing.
Yeah.
And that's the problem is that the progressives they're in control. And they're writing the narratives, and if they were to create a social security system based on their values, there would not be forgiveness built into it.
Right. Then there'd be civil war if anything like that's true.
Well, yeah, I mean...
The establishment has too much to lose for that to happen, though. I'm not afraid of anything collapsing, because the establishment on both sides has too much to lose for the radicals on either side to take over.
I mean, my prediction for the future is that it's going to get real bad before it gets better. Like, we're going to lose, like, 2 more presidential elections. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to become president. We're going to default on all of our loans. And then it's just gonna go downhill from there. Like, there's going to be actual... Like, I predicted for a long time, we're going to live to see honest-to-God neo-Nazi parties become powerful in the United States. Just because the left's going to get so powerful that they're going to feel super freaking emboldened.
Every time...
And I'm not saying that is a good thing. I'm saying it's
right.
terrifying.
It's kind of
I'm saying,
prophecy,
like,
right.
we've already had red shirts, brown shirts fights in the streets during the Trump administration. Like, the bad chemicals in the water that poison it are there already.
There's nothing in the world that makes more people turn into neo-Nazis than the racism of the left.
Yeah.
And I kind of disagree, or at least I guess I have a more hopeful view of the future. I think it's just going to be kind of like a sludgy decadence that we've been in forever. This is kind of Ross Douthat's point, which that's another book we should read.
Decadent Society.
Yeah, oh, it's so good.
I've read it. It's very good.
Yes, and his main... Oh, we can talk about it. That'd be great. And his main point is that, like, we're just kind of, like, slouching along. And I kind of agree with that, especially with how much the establishment controls everything. I remember I used to, when you're in your 20s, you're like, or your early 20s, like, getting out of college, you're like, oh, the establishment is terrible, down with the man. And, like, it's...
in my skin!
Right. And now, it's like, oh, I love the establishment because it means that neither of the radicals on the left or the right are going to be able to have enough power to make things go completely down the toilet.
Yeah, the only problem with that is just... the moment that either side, at some point you kind of need an adult in charge to start making positive, influential decisions. Like, that's kind of the point of the Knowles book. It's like,
right.
We need someone in the presidency or in some similar, position of power that says, this is an affirmative good. You should raise your kids this way. Their education system should be based on building people up and actually educating them, not just feeding them garbage. Like, we need... not necessarily top-down control, but just a clear sense of direction with the world. Like, what is actually going to happen? Because if you don't have that, then everything just turns into middling sludge, and it just keeps getting worse. It's like the decline just feels like it's escalating. Like, yeah. I'm very hopeful, aren't I? I
was gonna say I'm actually weirdly more hopeful than you are. I wouldn't have, myself as that, but
I mean, I my assumption is that we're going to live to see a bad outcome to all this because it's.
I think people are too lazy and too like.
The problem is there's too many bad people in control of the reins, and
they're gonna have to convince enough people to get off their Netflix to make a movement happen, and that's just not gonna happen.
At least not for a while. Like my assumption is there's gonna be an inflection point where people can't stop looking away, and then when that happens, then there's gonna be something that changes. But for now, people are just. They're willing to put up with a lot of it just as long as they can get by, and the moment we hit that like crystallization moment when the consequences are absolutely clear, that's when we're going to start seeing change. But I think that's going to happen when something really bad happens. Like I can't even begin to imagine, but like we're like all the crazy stuff that the kids are learning right now in schools, and you know, it's gonna have to take watching the obvious consequences of those bad decisions play out for there to be a change. So, but it's not like I don't think there's going to be an ultimate victory. It's just it's going to take a while for the rot to kind of work through and hit a nerve. But once people realize where the problems are, I think there'll be some sort of turnaround. It's going to be a while before that happens.
I just think that if the simulation loves us, what'll happen is I think there's only one way that Ben Shapiro ever tries to run for president, and that's if AOC like becomes really popular nationally. It looks like she's going to win. I think he knows that he could jump in then and maybe be able to take her down.
Do you really think there's going to be a Ben Shapiro presidency?
I don't think so, because he doesn't, unless he thinks things are really up against the wall to where he has to do it. And if AOC was running for president, he thought that she would win, that would be the catalyst.
When can AOC run for
already, right? Didn't she just
president? Minimum age 35 on hold on. She was 2019, she was 29 in 2019. Oh. So that means her birthday is 1990. So I don't think she can run till 2028. I think.
25, is it 35 or 38?
35.
So then it's 25, right?
Yeah, unless she turns 35 before January 20th. Which it would January 3rd. She technically could run in 2024.
I don't think she'd even run in 2028. I think it'll be sometime in like the kind of more distant future. But
yeah.
If she ever does, I think Shapiro would actually come out of the woodwork and do it.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends.
The simulation loves us, that'll happen. That'd just be so much fun.
Yeah, there's a Babylon Bee skit where they predict future presidential lineups, and it's just the pairings get progressively more insane as time goes on. It's like 2028 will be Charlie Kirk versus AOC. That's worse than this year. It's like, wait, the crocodile from the hit on The Masked Singer versus the ghost of Hillary Clinton. So what the frick?
Going back to the book, can you guess
so far off from the book?
Can you guess what Weasel said this? There's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Their basic dictatorship is actually allowing them to turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green. We want to start investing in solar. That would be our friend Justin Trudeau. What a weasel. Go back to Cuba where your father's from, you piece of garbage. Even America's hat deserves better than him.
Yeah, good grief. I feel so bad for my Canadian friends. And people think he's like, oh, he's such a cool president. Like, he's a freaking tyrant.
Yeah.
He's a weasel.
Just for what he did to the truckers is just terrible.
If you kill their enemies, they win. Just in a real quote, but it feels right.
The rest of the chapters towards the back of the book, like, they bolster his idea that these are the different ways that Schwab and his ilk want to control everything, but they're not super interesting.
I will say about the Great Reset of Energy chapter, it's kind of confirmed something I've known for a long time, is that the people that want to care about green energy don't know what they're doing. He's kind of just talking about the fact that, okay, they're shutting down coal plants, they're shutting down natural gas, they're shutting down nuclear energy, and then they're replacing it with technology that doesn't exist.
Right.
It's like we don't have a green energy grid powerful enough to power Europe, and Europe is facing skyrocketing energy prices because you're doing this. It's like you're shutting down nuclear reactors in Germany during an energy shortage. It's like
I have to. I've been ripping on AOC a little bit this podcast, but I have to give her some credit. She's finally come around on nuclear.
Like, okay,
finally,
if I had to be a single issue voter, like I would be 100% pro-nuclear because like that is the stupidest issue that people are still against, and I'm guessing it's just because it's a bunch of baby boomers that got told in the 60s that nuclear power is bad.
And also like, Chernobyl, but I mean,
Chernobyl is never going to happen again.
Gen 4 nuclear is like, it's basically, it can't, what's it called when things go real bad?
Meltdown.
It literally can't melt down.
Okay, honestly, watch the HBO Chernobyl miniseries. Like, you'd think it would make you anti-nuclear, but honestly, it just dramatizes just how much insane stuff has to happen for a nation-destroying nuclear meltdown to actually happen.
Right.
Like, first off, you have to design these things incredibly badly. Second off, you have to put people in charge that don't care about safety. And third off, you just have to push these things to such a degree that all the various statistical anomalies line up in one perfect moment to make it so that everything goes wrong at the exact same time. That's not going to happen anymore. Like, the closest thing that happened was the Fukushima meltdown, and even that was not as notable as the tsunami that caused it.
Right.
It's like the tsunami killed 20,000 people or something like that. The meltdown didn't kill anyone. Maybe like one or two people at the power plant, and like that's it. Like nuclear meltdowns are just not what people think they are.
Right.
It's like, so the fact that these plants are being shut down, it just speaks to how insane the technocrats are in charge are. It's like they don't know anything. They're incredibly stupid.
Right.
They think they know better. They're just paranoid people that are just signing checks and like signing off on these bills. Like Count Dankula talked about this. Like, you go to the European Union and the entire thing is just run by a bunch of bureaucrats that are just signing off bills all day. That's all they're doing. They don't know they don't know what they're signing. They don't care. They're just signing their name on the dotted line and then going home and hanging out with their hookers. It's like going to their exclusive Belgian super malls that only the rich aristocracy can go to. It's like
I do love that every time the World Economic Forum lands in Davos, there's like hookers everywhere.
Oh, that was a huge story this year. It's like every single prostitute in Europe went to Davos, Switzerland. And apparently it was completely out of hand, apparently. Although apparently the only protesters that showed up were all socialist groups, which is interesting. It's like, you're not going far enough. I'm like, oh, whatever.
One of the points that Jones makes in one of the chapters, I can't remember which one, it's probably the energy one actually, is that he doesn't understand why Greta Thunberg was allowed to go to the World Economic Forum and talk about how awful they all are when dissent is basically not allowed. But the reason why is because she's saying you're not going far enough. So it's like,
he says
that's the reason why.
He brings it up at one point.
Yeah.
It's like, the only time it brings up that Elon Musk point. It's like the problem with the World Economic Forum is that they all agree with each other too much. It's creepy.
Right.
It's like, and Jones thinks that's because Schwab is some sort of Machiavellian psychopath that can't handle any criticism. So he's just like, anyone who's criticized, we'll kick him out of Davos, and then all to be left with the people that agree with us. And I'm like, I don't know. That's a particular characterization, and Jones himself makes it clear that we just reading his books does not reveal very much of his character. He comes across as a blank slate who just wants to push his ideas, but Schwab just strikes me as a boring guy. He's like, it just has this weird, this weird German complex that says we can fix everything practically.
Shapiro made the great point that, I don't think he said it in these words, but basically like the simulation's getting lazy because now the villains are basically just becoming Bond villains. Because Schwab is just so close to just like a Bond villain, and then he played a quote.
It's not hard to say. It's not hard to make Klaus Schwab look like a villain. So
right.
But he's probably it feels like that. It feels like we're in the lazy last season of a television show where
right.
It's like balloons, train crash. It's like, what the heck?
Just waiting for someone to jump the shark. I was gonna try to find that quote about Schwab being a blank slate because I thought it was really good, but I didn't want to go through the time to find it. But I just happened to be completely right open to it. Schwab has made himself a blank slate like movie stars used to do before they thought it was a good idea to share everything about themselves. That's because he knows if he talks about the failures of others, the conclusion readers will draw is that Schwab and his Davos buddies have none of those flaws. They are consciously assuming the mantle of the Ubermensch, the Superman, who never share the slightest detail about themselves, which would make us connect with them as human beings.
Now here goes the conspiracy theorist in me.
Quote, page 171, but yeah, it basically accuses Joe Biden and Prince Charles of taking all their climate change advocacy from the World Economic Forum, which I don't know. I don't see any evidence to assume that they're just, well, unless you're the, Biden is a puppet type, which
I think they're just monolithic in thought, so they all just say the same stuff. Like, that's more realistic than the World Economic Forum is like pulling the strings. They just all have the same talking points because there's not much diversity of thought in that entire strata of leadership.
Yeah, it's very top down. Not even like in a we obey the top, just in a we defer to everyone else, which is actually it's something interesting. I've heard people talk about. It's one of the reasons why modern technology and technocracy is the way it is because the sheer volume of human thought has just gotten so wide. Like, there was a time in about 200 years ago when it was actually possible to know everything there was possible to know. Like, people like Samuel Coleridge, they would go to college and they would read every single book that was published. And you could be the kind of person like, your Thomas Jefferson, who just has this incredible body of knowledge where you can ask him about any subject and he has a formed opinion on it. It's like, hey, what do you feel about woodwork? What do you feel about astronomy? What do you feel about aerodynamics or electricity? And they would be able to answer a question because they'd read about it.
Right.
But in modern knowledge, everything is deferral because you just can't know everything. Like, every single body of study is so deep now. You spend your entire life just studying one thing and then putting your entire body out through these papers, and they get put into these university systems where the knowledge is just accumulating so deeply, and there's so much of it. And whenever, and this is something I've talked to when I have university friends, they always defer. A good university professor nowadays is someone who sticks to the guns that they're good at, and then just defers on everything else. I mean, like, because I've tried to get people on to talk about different subjects, and they'll say like, "Oh, I don't know how to study. I can't answer those questions." So you have to bring on someone who studies that. And I'm like, that's a sign of a good university professor. But it also creates this culture of radical deferral where, if you want to know why 90% of scientists agree on climate change, it's because everyone's just deferring to one climate scientist.
Right.
It's like, well, that's probably true. But the culture it makes it easier for everyone to pass the buck to the guy who says he knows what he's doing, which is why you get people like, who's the famous Noam Chomsky? It's like, someone who's not a political scientist. He's a linguist, right. And he's famous for writing political commentary. Right. It's like, well, you get that's the sign of a bad academic is you're making money off something that's not related to your discipline. But
right, he's the dumb person's intellectual, Noam Chomsky. Oh, he's just the worst.
Oh man,
talk about a weasel.
But although I think Alex Jones might actually like Noam Chomsky because they're kind of that same lot of early 2000s liberalism.
Yeah, of anti-imperialism for sure, like radical. What's it called? We don't want to interfere anywhere in the world. Isolationism.
Yeah, chapter 8's kind of boring. It's just talking. It's basically eat the bugs.
Well, before we move forward, we have to recognize the very pinnacle of the book, the very best part of it, the part that made me extremely happy that I took the time to read it and do this podcast about it. And this is the quote from Jones. Now, I consider myself an environmentalist, not wanting people to spray chemicals that cause frogs to, well, behave in unusual ways.
Of course he has to frigging feather in his most famous quote.
I was like, I was at a cigar lounge reading this, and I started laughing out loud. People must have looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah, he also kind of goes into the plant explosion conspiracy from last year. Which, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, like the whole 20 of food processing plants exploding at once. Or...
I didn't know about it, and it's crazy that I didn't know about it.
Well,
it's not really anywhere in the news.
New York Post did a lot of coverage on it, where a lot of food processing plants just had weird fires at the same time within over the course of a couple months. Yeah. My takeaway from that is they're the wrong plants, if that makes any sense. Like, modern food production is very bottlenecked this is something. There's a good podcast my buddy Davis did over at the Pamphleteer with the guy at the Beef Initiative. You should go listen to it. But so much of the food industry right now, the reason why the quality is so low is that like everything is being funneled through a bunch of very small processing plants. Like all meat in the country comes out of 5 plants or less than 5 plants. Like back in the day, every single county in the United States used to have a meat processing plant. So if you had cattle, you'd take your cow to it, they'd butcher it, and then you'd wind up with an entire cow's worth of beef. So, every state in the country could do that. But now, if you want to process meat, you have to go through Tyson. Like, there's no one else. Right. But of all the plants being destroyed, it's like the Hot Pocket plant in Arkansas. It's like, okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm not too worried if that's the only thing getting blown up. Like, okay. Like, it's creepy, but the question that has to be followed up is, how common is this sort of thing? Mm-hmm. Like, how common is it? Do we just live in a country where casual breakdown of our industrial facilities just happens all the time? Like, are there constant fires in industrial plants that we just don't talk about because it's just mundane? Is the New York Post bringing it up just because people are so on edge? Like, it's like I could believe a conspiracy is like, oh, we're gonna knock out the food supply, but it just doesn't seem. If you're gonna do that, you're gonna go after Tyson. You're going to go after the meat supplying plants. You're going to go after the grain plants. You're going to go after the basic essentials. And first off, you're not going to do it when you don't have a replacement in line. You're going to wait until all the factories that are being built. This is a thing that's happening. I've reported on it. There are factories that are creating like tubs that produce artificial meat. That is like, that they just clone it and grow it artificially, which I'm iffy about, but if the year is 2030 and I'm eating artificial chicken, I'm not going to be complaining as much as I am going to be eating friggin' cricket meat. But
right.
It's sweet man-made horrors beyond my comprehension. It's like, okay, there are lesser man-made horrors I'm willing to tolerate for the sake of eating meat, but oh well. Like, I'm not as worried about this as Jones is. Like, this is just kind of a weird hang up, but Jones assumes a conspiracy where they're at all times, so I'm gonna call this one a wash for him, at least mostly.
Right, it's his default.
It doesn't help when people like Bill Gates just are be like, "Oh, we need to get rid of people's meat diet," but you're not helping.
Right, Bill Gates not helping.
I will say, I think Chapter 9 is kind of where the book kind of peaks for the most part. It kind of feels like the climactic chapter, and it's got some weird tangents, but I think it's probably beyond the Yuval chapter, it's probably the best summation of the book. And it's about, in the chapter is, the globalists try to find a narrative. And it's about, why is it that Klaus Schwab has not had more luck making his ideas more popular? Which I actually think this is the most interesting question in the book. It's like, well, why isn't he more popular? He's like, okay, you think that, he's a global controller, he's got all these people that went behind him, Bill Gates is his friend. Like, why isn't he more popular? Why are his books failing so frequently?
Right. And that actually ties into exactly, like, some of the quotes. This was a very funny chapter, too. He goes back to him having to release the same book over and over again.
Yeah.
When that failed, releasing the second book, he released the book Shaping the Future of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Maybe because, like a tourist in a foreign country, he believes that if he just speaks slowly and loudly, he can get the locals to understand him. Another great quote from that chapter. It must be so difficult for Klaus Schwab to have all these important people praising his book, only to have the regular people treat you like an embarrassing uncle.
Yeah. I think his most recent book, Stakeholder Capitalism, probably made more of a dent, because I've heard that term bandied about a lot lately at work. So it doesn't surprise me that he's making some progress, but it's still, like, this is still niche stuff. It's like, Klaus Schwab praises the Chinese Communist Party. Under the leadership of Chairman Mao, from 1949 to 1975, the Communist Party of China has become the lone governing party of the country, ending political turmoil. More decidedly, the CPPC founded the People's Republic of China as a single-party state, which brought stability to the regime for the price of democratic freedom. He uses democratic freedom like a slur.
What a Bond villain.
He really is. Pretense gone, yeah.
Right.
The model Schwab loves is a simple one. The power of the state is combined with the power of big business, and the people are left with not a voice. Or just he's kind of trafficking in that cliche idea from the early 2000s that fascism is just corporations and governments working together, which is not what fascism is, but
that's more a lot of this
that's like the pop version of fascism, where it's like, oh, that's what Bush did.
That's a lot of it reminds me of in the Chesterton book, What's Wrong with the World, he talks about big business and big government as Hudge and Gudge, like working to like basically stamp out your individuality and your like national pride and stuff. I kind of saw some parallels between that.
Yeah, but that's not fascism though. It's
not fascism. No, I'm saying it's not fascism. It's more like what Chesterton was talking about.
Yeah.
Fascism.
It's a bad thing, which is why people should generally be mad that corporations have basically decided they want to be progressive and work with the government. But it's
a bad thing, which is why it's called fascist, because the only two words that people know for bad are fascist and Nazi, so they have to pick one of them.
Yeah, it's like the guy sweating as he has to pick two buttons. Which one?
Right. Which one do I call this person that I think is bad?
Yeah, exactly. Or it's the smug version of that, where he's pressing both buttons at once and he's like, smug. At its simplest, the government's main role is the stakeholder model is equitable prosperity, which means the government should enable any individual actor to maximize his or her prosperity, but do so in a way that is equitable for people and the planet. He's either Swedish or German. Either way, I don't feel charitable. So.
Right. Another one. Looking into the future. This is Schwab. I'm not come close to that accent. So, looking to the future, governments will most likely, but with different degrees of intensity, decide that it's in the best interest of society to rewrite some of the rules of the game and permanently increase their role. That's not scary at all.
But then Jones kind of, which ends up being kind of the ending narrative of the poem.
Why is it that I remain optimistic about the ability to defeat the globalists? It's because they can't tell a story to save their lives, and stories ruin the world.
That's true.
And then he goes on a boomer rant about why Top Gun Maverick is the best movie
It's like, that's a point where you could go back to the Bible and talk about biblical narratives, and he goes to Top Gun. It's like, okay.
He's kind of doing the,
it's not woke. It's a great movie about real human drama. I'm like,
okay, dude, it's Top Gun Maverick. It's awesome, but it's not deep. I mean, like, I get what you're going for, buddy, but
this is similar to the point that the drama of the WWE is kind of like that same story over and over again.
Yeah, that's just his point. It's like
lower level stuff.
It's low level drama that speaks to like real human problems, but it's funny to me that he picks Top Gun Maverick as his example.
Alex Jones is a man of the people, okay, Tyler?
He is, but yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna fight over this, but
this is a persuasion play.
Make an appeal to a widely acceptable value. Well, he's talking about why is it that Schwab, what is it that Schwab's trying to do? And he says that the difference is like, authentic storytelling that deeply affects people expresses something deeply within us and captures something. And he's saying that Schwab is more manipulative than that. He's basically saying like, I'm gonna make you tense, and then I'm gonna persuade you by thumbing the solution in as a part of making you nervous and panicked about the state of the future. So
this is the persuasion play. Make an appeal to a widely acceptable value such as integrity, solidity, or fairness. Then pivot to the fear, COVID, climate change, environmental degradation, and the pace of technological change. The reader feels a little disoriented because they've moved so quickly, my throat, from the place of pleasure.
Do you want me to have the Alex Jones impersonator read it on my Kindle?
Okay, let's do this.
Let's see if I can figure this out.
Yeah, I was informed that Kindle can read it in a voice, or at least it can pair up with like Audible or something, and
Watch how Schwab tries first to push you into that panic stage before moving in for the kill.
Truly shared values and well-established moral principles such as integrity, solidarity, and fairness are the glue that binds societies, enabling them to function and thrive in an atmosphere of trust. The magnitude of the issues we collectively face today, a deadly virus making us fear for our lives, the climate and environmental crisis, and the degradation of nature generating existential fear about the future. The speed of technological change provoking anxiety for our livelihoods and our way of life often shifts our attitudes from altruistic to self-centered. This is the persuasion play. Make an appeal to widely accepted values such as integrity, solidarity, and fairness. Then pivot to the fear, COVID, climate change, environmental degradation, and pace of technological change. The reader feels a little disoriented because they've been moved so quickly from a place of pleasure, considering the values of integrity, solidarity, and fairness, to fears of the future. And then, when they're in a vulnerable state, tell them they've gone from being altruistic to self-centered. It really is domestic abuse of the reader. You might want to scare a shelter for reader abuse victims.
The most Jonesy line came after I should have had it read in the voice, but it was, it really is domestic abuse of the reader, and you might want to seek out a shelter for reader abuse victims. Schwab then moves into savior role.
Yeah, I like.
I actually, that quote though is really one of the sharpest points that he makes. Like, I do think that all of that is true. Like,
Well, it's kind of like the classic Scott Adams persuasion move.
Yeah.
It's like you appeal to them emotionally and you work through that as opposed to trying to rationalize it. Which is the the height wisdom too. It's you negotiate with the elephant, not the man riding it. So
right.
Good.
I do think it's hilarious that the person who reads this book on Audible is like an Alex Jones impersonator. It's great.
I don't even... That's insane. I can't do it for 5 minutes. This guy does it for 5 hours. Yeah.
Again, the globalists are not interested in having a conversation with you. That's because they're smarter than you. They decide
They're smarter than
they get to decide what's in the best interest of society, which rules need to be rewritten, which parts of the role need to be permanently increased. And what is their goal? Schwab tells you. He thinks he's won, and yet there have never been a time in history in which the ruling powers have been more distrusted than this by their citizens. We are not at the... I'm reading this ironically. We're not at the end of the story. We're just at the beginning. They have operated this stealth so far, but they're coming out of the shadows. They believe they are strong. The truth is, they've never been more vulnerable.
That's... Yeah. But I think it does... but the end of Chapter 9 kind of... It feathers into what I thought was the best part of the book, and it's that he's not... Jones ultimately accepts that goodness will out, and that what we're dealing with is just a temporary problem. And he does so in an overtly Christian appeal. And do you want to have the Jones spot read the last few paragraphs, starting with Augustine? Or
I can't figure out how to start it like in the middle of the page, so we might have to hear a little bit of the...
And despite all of their gun control measures, the fact is, the South has most of the guns. The Second Amendment was not placed right after free speech because the Founding Fathers wanted to protect our right to hunt. The Second Amendment serves as a check on a government that might seek to become a tyranny. I understand these are scary times, but I'm not afraid. I believe as St. Augustine did, that the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. I have sought to set the truth free in this book, abundantly using the words of Klaus Schwab and his fellow globalists. The power is in your hands. However, in the final chapter of this book, I will review 10 areas to watch for globalist plans.
It sounded a lot better when it wasn't read by him.
And then in the last chapter, I'll review 10 areas for which the globalist plans as God plans their ultimate defeat, which is basically the ghostwriter slapping on one of his essays at the end of the book to fill the word count.
Yeah, pretty much. But I like that sentiment, though. Like,
yeah, it's a great... once again, more depth than I would have thought Alex Jones would have.
You don't have to defend the truth. You let it loose, and it will defend itself. The power is in your hands. Which... maybe not in Alex Jones's hands, but in general, like,
about the people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right sentiment, though. I mean, like, the truth will out. That's the hope in all this. It's like, whatever these people are doing that is bad or good or ultimately in our favor or against our favor, or if they're gonna turn us into RoboCop, like, I like that he's like, it's like the meme, in the I know things are scary right now, but in the end, Jesus wins. It's like, it's like it's all gonna work out one way or the other, even if it doesn't feel like it is. It's like, this is all talk, this is all heat, even from Alex, it's all heat. It's like, but things will be bright in the end, which is what I believe. Like, I know I talk like a doomer, but it's like, in my perspective, it's just gonna be a long road to the end, and we might not live to see it, but.
Right.
But for Alex, it's like, it'll all be right. And they're crazy, and he's crazy, but it will be right. It will work out, which I think is one of those things people need to hear sometimes.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I agree. Like I said, I'm not quite as I don't think it's going to be quite as catastrophic as you do, just because I think the establishment has enough firm control to keep things from getting too crazy and people are too lazy to rise up. But
I don't know, man. We have Joe Biden as the president of the United States, and says silly things and gets us in, like, wants to send people to die. It's crazy. It's like it's very easy for me to be like, the world isn't going to spin out of control because the establishment's in control. It's going to spin out of control because the establishment isn't doing enough to make it better.
Right.
Which has been my weirdest political transformation as an adult is me saying that the establishment is important and needs to be good, but it's just saying the wrong things.
Right.
It's like, do you want to cover the last chapter, or do you think this is kind of redundant?
I think that just the last page where he comes to his final point, I think is really important. He says, "How do we fight back against this darkness?" Well, I think having him read it might be.
Well,
and try to starve those who live outside the city. Now we know what happens to the dissidents. They'll be exiled, kept from the city, and forced into a digital gulag. The reason they didn't tell people about their plans is they know you would hate it. However, when they spring the truth on people, they'll still hate it, just as much as if they've been told about it all along. We are in a war for the future of the world. The globalists want an anti-human future in which they will capture control of our species and direct the future of human development. But that's not a future the people want. They want a future of freedom, where scientific discoveries liberate them to be so much more than they could ever be when they were focused on mere survival or dealing with the ravages of disease. When I say we are all children of God, I mean it from the viewpoint that each one of us has our own individual truth, and we seek to live according to that truth. When a person is calm and their needs are met, they're concerned about the greater human family. Science can serve as a handmaiden of humanity's development when it makes a poor master, which is exactly what the globalists seek to bring about. The globalists are destined to fail. It is God's will. We were created to be the masters of our own fate. We only need to choose that path, and it will open up before us. We hope you've enjoyed this unabridged production of the Great Reset.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same sentiment. It's, power's in your hands. God wills it.
The Gospel of John gives me comfort when it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That's one of my favorite Bible verses, and that he mentioned that. I really liked a lot.
Alex Jones is Christian. Who would have guessed?
Yeah. And a relatively intelligent, nuanced Christian, too. It was pretty surprising.
The key word in all this is relatively.
You're not wrong. Well, I'd kind of like to end at the beginning because there's a quote at the beginning of the book. What's it called? Not a prescript. What is it?
Intro, prologue.
What the quote at the beginning? Not epigram. I can never think of the word, but where books will start with a quote.
Yeah.
And it's a great George Carlin quote, and it's actually close to my heart because a songwriter friend of mine named Eric Ritland came out with a record a couple years ago it was a movie album, so it's there were clips from movies, but also his songs behind it. And one of the songs is the George Carlin bit that this is from. So he basically just took the bit and made it as part of his movie album. And the quote is, "Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations." That's the first quote in the book. And he goes on. It's a brilliant bit. On the record, it's called The Big Club.
I wouldn't throw around the word "they" in 2023 so carelessly, but...
Well, if you understand that he's just talking about...
I'm joking! Unfortunately, thanks to a very unfortunate guest on the Alex Jones show.
This is George Carlin, not Kanye West. But later on in that bit, he says, "It's a big club, and you ain't in it." It's the same club they use to beat you over the head when they tell you what to think and what to believe. It's brilliant. It's such a good bit.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to start the book and to end the podcast.
Yep. So do we recommend The Great Reset and the War for the World by Alex Jones, unironically or ironically?
If you can read it quickly because it's just a fast read and you just kind of want to get an idea of one of the narratives about what's going on in the world, and it does open you up to a lot of stuff that you might not have known. It's a quick, easy read. I would recommend it. It's actually, and like you said, the hopefulness of it, and especially if you're a Christian person, like there's really like a Christian hopefulness in it that's really refreshing, and that I did not figure to find in the book or like in any real like political book these days. So
I will just say, if you follow the meme of Alex Jones, I wouldn't read it for that. It's too serious for that. It's not. It's sporadically funny, where he has all the quotes we mentioned, but it's like this is him trying to be serious and offer like serious commentary on a political issue, and I'd say it's a mixed bag in that regard. Like which is like which is the biggest problem. It's just he's trying to be serious about the world, and Alex Jones is not someone you should take overtly seriously. But the point, the details and the quotes he dredged up are probably more valuable than his commentary, just because it just shows you that there are some very strange people in the halls of power, and they have some very strange ideas. And even if you don't think that they're overtly malicious or have the power to control people, because I don't think they do. I don't think that Klaus Schwab is controlling Justin Trudeau and handing him things to say. But I think he is influential, and people tend to listen to him. And the World Economic Forum tends to be a place for that vision. We should mention, I sent you. There's an article I sent you.
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Peterson, he is a very notable critic of the World Economic Forum, and his criticism is mostly that he thinks that their vision is too anti-human and has no regard for humanity and the way people suffer under these policies. So if you want a serious critique of the World Economic Forum, go read my article on Leaders Media where I talk about this. He's very succinct in the fact that he thinks the World Economic Forum, their vision is not. It's too technocratic. It's too unwilling to address the exigent ways these policies are going to hurt people. And he's actually gathering a conference in November to create his own Davos. He wants to create a pro-human, classical liberal version of Davos that addresses climate change and all the other problems that Davos is ostensibly created to address, but in a way that's more humanistic. And whatever ends up coming of that, I'm interested to see. But
I think that could change the world. Like it could really have like global impact.
Yeah.
Listen to the podcast he did with Joe Rogan to really find. He really digs deep into his criticisms of the World Economic Forum and what he's trying to do with it. It'll hopefully be a good antidote to, like, it's a far better antidote to the stuff Jones is talking about than. But I mean, I don't think the point of the Great Reset, the Jones book, was to give like a way out other than, fight and be individual. Like, it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, the other biggest problem with the Alex Jones book is that it was written by Alex Jones, and no one's going to read it. But if better, higher resolution versions of these ideas are in the hands of people like Jordan Peterson and Thomas Sowell and Joe Rogan, we're in a better spot.
Right. I think you should read it just for the actuality that 1 out of every 10 things that Alex Jones thinks comes true eventually. So, I mean, you could be reading into the future.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Right.
Problem is like I said, you don't know which 10% is going to be real,
right.
But it's in there.
Right.
So anyway.
Right.
So that's, do you want to shout out your stuff, or do you want to...
I don't really have anything.
Follow him on Twitter, mercilessly bully him.
Check out musicinminnesota.com. I manage a guy who does writing for there, and they're just a website that talks about everything from like the net worth of every rapper you could conceivably think of to like the top songs of every country singer. My buddy Eric actually has the number 2 Google search for best rock songs right now. It was number 1 for a while, but it went down to number 2.
Nice.
But yeah, just check out musicinminnesota.com. That's about it.
All right. Good to have you on. What book are we going to be discussing next?
I don't know. Maybe Speechless. Maybe.
I was suggesting Father Felix's Liberalism is a Sin, which is funny. Which would be funny because he's a Novus Ordo Catholic, and I am very Anglican, but leaning on post-liberal. So it might be an interesting combination. So
I think that's even too. that book is even too controversial for my alter ego, so
That
we'll see.
That maybe. I've also thought of maybe something like Case for Christian Nationalism, but that book is like radioactive at the moment. So
yeah, why don't we just read some Scott Adams?
I think that might actually be interesting, like because
I have so many thoughts on Scott Adams. I followed him for so long. And
his books are, absent his delve into race realism, his books are very interesting. So, but yeah, well, I don't know when this next theoretical podcast will be, but follow us. Keep following us, and
hopefully by the summer we'll have another one.
Yeah, hopefully soon. But we will.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Have a good night. The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions and cultural review podcast. Editing, hosting, and producing are by Tyler Hummel. Art by Crystal Cali. And original music is composed by Guap Squad Gang and Melissa Lafira. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below and tell us anyone you think would be a good guest for the show. Thank you for listening.